Good morning, church. Good to see you here today. I hope you've had a wonderful weekend. I mean, the weather is fantastic. I know some of you like summer. I know some of you like it 90 degrees outside, but I like it 68 degrees, 75 degrees, and I wish it was that way in the auditorium right now. I know most of you agree with me. You don't at all. I'm getting glares. Don't go near the thermostats. It is good to be here today and be able to worship with you. And I do see that we have several visitors with us, and it's a joy to have you here with us. The fact that you chose to come and worship with us really is an honor, and we are pleased that you could be here today. We hope to make you feel as welcome as possible, and if there's anything we can do to help in that regard and to help you worship better, please let us know. You matter. You really do. We're going to start a new series talking about how you can change a life today. I want us to start focusing on the things that we can do, should do, must do right now. The impact that we can have on the world around us. And it doesn't have to be require grand dramatic gestures necessarily. You can have an impact on someone today. A positive impact. A very strong impact. I was trying to think about ways that I could illustrate that, and you have a list of stories that appear in your mind, but in some ways, being at church, God provides. It was not less than 10 minutes ago, I was up in the booth taking communion, and beforehand, I took a mint, and in front, I won't name names, even though I just said they're all in the booth right now, don't look, and I took a mint, a hard candy, and I bit into it right in front of a dentist, and some of her family just went, whew. Gave me that look, and I was like, I should not have done that. I should not have done that. And they have blessed me with that look. I learned out of fear you can make someone's life better by not chewing in hard candy. And they gave me a wonderful illustration in front of all you good people here today. So they're glaring, maybe a little bit. All right. Anyway, you can change a life. I mean, my goodness, for the better. Whether there's 100% turnaround in someone's life, maybe those circumstances exist. But maybe if you just move the needle 1% at a time, the cumulative impact that you can have is incredibly significant. And as Christians, shouldn't we want to do that? Shouldn't we want to affect the world around us? When God says, let your light shine, he's saying, have an effect on the world for the good that points to him, because it's his light that illuminates the world. Should we engage and take joy in that, not forcing our will, but simply spreading God into the world, and to be sure the world needs more God in it. We get to participate. You can change a life today. We'll start by considering purpose. We need to be reminded sometimes that is a purpose that we have. When we think about the way that we exist as Christians, one of the two biggest things that has to come to mind, and of course it's the greatest command to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and body. But the second is like unto it, that you would love your neighbor as yourself. And when we stop and think about the way that God impacts the world and the way that God affected the world, it really is God having a relationship with mankind. And as we look throughout the entire Bible, it was God having impact, a change on the people that he created in his image. And when we take ownership of our relationship with God and we imitate him and we take on the characteristics of him and his purposes, we find that our focus should be on people as well. Isn't that a critical and beautiful part of Christianity? The story is not about me, it's about God. And even before me, it's about the people that God loves and how I can have an impact on them. And we got to be okay with the fact that we're not the main characters in this story, but that we get to affect the people that he cares and loves about so much. It's people. And it's easy to think of people in the broadest sense possible. Faces get lost. But as we develop this today, I want us to think about specific people, a variety of them. In your head now, you may be thinking of a variety of kind of people that you interact with, maybe in your family, maybe in your school, maybe at work, or maybe it's the people that you pass on a regular basis. A variety of backgrounds, of histories, of spiritual inclinations, and yet every single one of those you can stop and realize I can have an impact on them. I can be a blessing to them. That can give them goodness or kindness or patience. And sometimes they're really, really going to need that, and you move the needle a lot. And sometimes maybe not as much, but it's just a gift that you're giving someone from God, and you're the conduit for it. More importantly, you've got people very specific that you know need. They need uplifting. They might need a change. And with care and love and engagement and consideration, you think about those people, very personal to you. Maybe it's just people that take your coffee order every day. And sometimes it's the fun people that you have at church. I love this photo. I've had this for some time, and we all went out and get ice cream one time. And just that spirit that kids have to run and play and get messy with the ice cream and stuff is super fun. This was an encouragement. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it matters significantly. And in a world that we live in where sometimes the focus is so much on ourselves, we may be tempted to say, why would I do this? I got too much going on in my own life to worry about other people. Why would I do that? I got to think about my own spiritual growth. Why do I give time to other people? That's a temptation to think that. It's an easy excuse to fall into, but when we get to the core of who we are, we always have to go back to Jesus, as he's the one who defined how we're supposed to be, how we must be to please God. Why would I do this? Because isn't that exactly how Jesus was? To care and love other people, to lift them up in sometimes unexpected ways, and definitely in a myriad of ways. And so it would behoove us to spend time looking at why Jesus would do such a thing. Consider the really, really classic teaching that he gave in Luke chapter 10, verse 30, the Good Samaritan. You may not know that story, and so you may want to turn over to Luke chapter 10 and beginning in verse 30. And even if you do know it, you might read it again just to kind of pick up a little extra nugget and make sure there's a detail that you didn't miss, or it's always fun to find new things. But Jesus is being challenged in a particular way, and so he's going to share a story with them, a parable, and it's going to be instructive. It's going to have sort of an aspirational aspect to it, that he's expecting us to go beyond maybe where we would find ourselves. But it's an expectation that he has, that we should be this particular way. It's no different than who he is in character. It says, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a certain priest came down that road. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite, when he arrived at the place, he came and he looked, and he passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, he came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So he went to him, and he bandaged his wounds, and pouring in oil and wine, he set him on his own animal, he brought him to an inn, and he took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and he said to him, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. So which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And he said, he who showed mercy on him. And Jesus said this, and remember this part, go and do likewise. That's a pretty stunning story just on the surface to show great care and compassion for someone. It's a stunning story when you see someone, when you start breaking it down, go a little bit deeper into it. A priest? A priest, we would have an expectation that he would care for all people. We would expect that. And so we would think in our heads that the story should go, a priest saw the man who had been robbed, and immediately the priest went in and got involved and was sacrificial and loving, but that's not what happened. There was a disappointment. Well, okay, the next guy comes along. It's a Levite. A Levite, well, that's of the descendants of Aaron. It's of the tribe of Levi. They would serve God's people in a very specific capacity. They must see the man. He literally saw him in the suffering. He must go to him for sure and serve and care and love. Surely he would do that. But he doesn't. And we go in a little bit deeper, and it just says Samaritan, and many of you are aware that this were people that were generally viewed as, frankly, enemies of the Jewish people. They were looked down on, and the Samaritan might look at the Jewish people as their enemy as well. And so it takes this unexpected turn, but not so unexpected from God's point of view, is it? From Jesus' point of view, this is just a human seeing another human. From Jesus' point of view, this is a man created in God's image seeing another man created in God's image. This is a man who has capability to make a difference in someone's life, seeing another man who is suffering and needs help. And that's why, despite the Samaritan differences and despite the history difference and despite the prejudices, what is core to this is one human seeing another one, and he was moved with compassion. That's the correct response. And he just didn't stop at the compassion. He got involved. He gave of his own goods. He gave of his own time. He probably went out of his way to travel to make sure this man was taken care of. It wasn't just a thing to check off his list. I did my good deed for the year and I'm done. He got involved to make sure the guy was completely taken care of. Did the Samaritan change someone's life that day? Yes. Yes, he did. And then Jesus says, go and do likewise. That's a powerful teaching, isn't it? A powerful teaching. Anyway, he said, well, okay, Jesus is just giving this wise story to people, and we could sit down with it and spend time with it, and we could talk about the story, but Jesus does more than that when you look at the fullness of his life. It's not just the teachings, which are powerful and true in and of themselves. It's that Jesus lived this way. He lived this way. It was his normal existence. That is additionally instructive and aspirational and an expectation for us today. Jesus is pushing us by his own teaching and his example to live this way as our normal, not just a special event, but as our normal. Well, what do I mean by that? Go to the book of John, Gospel of John. We'll start in chapter 1, but we're going to quickly go through chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as our examples. I know that's a lot, but we can do it. As I said, we'll move through quickly. And in each of these chapters, when we look at this, we're going to see that Jesus was showing people how much they matter. He showed them how much they mattered to him, to God. And when you start in the beginning of the Gospel of John, John wants you to understand exactly who Jesus is. This isn't just some wise man. That would be impressive. This isn't just some pretty good guy. This is the Son of God. This is the Word. This is deity who has come in the form of man and is walking amongst us. This is the light of the entire universe walking amongst us. He begins with that in those first 17 verses. And that's the lens he wants us to see everything else in his gospel. This is Jesus walking amongst humans. And what was his purpose? To change our lives. To truly and magnificently change our lives for the better, for the good. And it happened in a myriad of ways with a myriad of responses. And that is instructive, it is aspirational, and it is an expectation of God for us. We should be excited about that, because it's telling us exactly how we can live with the same purpose with Jesus. He showed people how much they matter. Well, here we go. We'll start John 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. John chapter 1. If you look in John chapter 1 a little bit further than when he gave the beginning explanation there, you can see that there's some discipleship going on. And John's preaching and teaching, and John's got some followers, but a couple of his followers approach Jesus. Now, John has pointed out that this is the Lamb of God. There's a transition period that's going on here. This is him, the Messiah you've been waiting for. And they said, Rabbi, where are you staying? Verse 39, he said to them, come and see. So they came and saw where he was staying and remained with him that day. That was about the 10th hour. And one of the two heard John speak, and he followed him. It was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first found his own brother Simon, and he said to him, we have found the Messiah, which is translated the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. And when Jesus looked at him, this is Simon, he said, you are Simon the son of Jonah. You shall be called Cephas, which is translated a stone. An interesting interaction that took place there. But it's Jesus having an interaction with people and blessing them and just the conversation and time he's given. We'll go into descriptors here in just a second. John chapter 2, one of the most famous stories of Jesus. Even many people not even associated with Christianity have at least heard this particular account. John chapter 2, first miracle of Jesus. It takes place at a wedding in Cana. The situation occurred and where they ran out of drink. And Jesus' mother comes to him and brings the situation up to him. Jesus takes action. And beginning in verse 7, Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water. These were massive water pots, massive. And they filled them to the brim. And he said, draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast. And they took it. And when the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, he did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said to him, every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now. Jesus is in a situation where he's going to make someone's life better. They didn't even know. They didn't even know it was him. And in the context of a great wedding where it would be inhospitable not to provide enough, Jesus has got involved in that situation and done it to an extraordinary degree so that someone else benefited, someone else looked better, someone else was blessed. And not just the bridegroom, but the entire wedding party in the city of Cana. He engaged people to make a life better. John chapter 3, it was nighttime. Nicodemus approached Jesus, perhaps an inconvenient time. And yet Jesus met him. And he had questions, heavy questions. He was a Pharisee, and Jesus is not scared of the heavy questions. And yes, Pharisees were quite opposed to Jesus, largely. Many were, but not all of them. And so Jesus gave this time at night to this guy associated with a party that was very generally opposed to him. And still, he spoke to him these wildly massive theological concepts, and he gave himself fully at this particular time. He didn't hold back. He didn't hold back. Most of us know John chapter 3, verse 16. It's one of the most famous Bible verses in the world. I bet I know I'd heard it and I'd seen it, but it never struck to me that was associated with a story, a conversation between Jesus and a specific person. I bet I was in my 20s when that hit me, because I'd always isolated that verse. I don't want to isolate verses. I want to see them where they are. And Jesus is telling him that who he is and how he can please God, how Nicodemus can be pleasing to God. And he gives him that powerful verse, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. Whoever should believe on him should not perish, but have everlasting life. At that inconvenient time, with this person associated with difficult people, Jesus is trying to change his life by blessing him with incredible teaching. And then as we close out that section, because Jesus doesn't stop, even in verse 21, he said, he who does truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been done in God. He's inviting Nicodemus to partake in the kingdom, changing his life. Simple. John chapter 4, the Samaritan woman at the well. Jesus said at one point, I need to go through Samaria. And he goes and he encounters this woman at the well. Many times we've talked about this lesson. Many times you've heard the lesson. And many times you've probably heard the reasons why he probably wouldn't, or regular people probably would not encounter this lady or give her time. But Jesus, we can see in his purpose, is to change lives for the better. And so he gives of his time and he gives of his teaching, he gives of the moment, and he gives truth to change this lady's life. Oh, they have a discussion, and of course he's leading it towards the spiritual, because that's where the most meaningful change can take place. And he gets her there, and she's, where do you worship? Mount Gerizim, where we worship your people in Jerusalem. And then he throws these heavy truths that get beyond the idea of separation. Because real change, real elevation in life is not about separation from God, but closing that gap and helping someone connect to God. And so he's giving her the blessing of seeing that God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. That would be a point coming where Mount Gerizim, Jerusalem, that's not important for where you worship. Anywhere in the world, a Christian can worship, and as long as they're driven towards God, it doesn't matter if it's in a field or a mountaintop or in the desert or near the beach or in Evansville, Indiana, in a building, you can worship God in spirit and in truth. And he's given her that moment that is instructional and it's aspirational, because it's a big thought, but it's an expectation. And he's further going into his purpose of changing lives. And man, did it? Of course it did. She responded so powerfully and ran off and told people, I think I found the Christ. And they went and encountered him, and some believed. Man, lives are changing. John chapter 5, where Bethesda, the gate near the sheep gate, and there's a group of people that are paralyzed, they're lame, they're blind, they're sick, a group of sick people, and they're at a pool, and they're thinking that an angel comes down and stirs up the pool, and if they can get to it in time, their lives can be changed, because they might be healed. Well, Jesus is passing through there, and he sees a guy. In verse 5, a certain man was there who had infirmity 38 years. Can you imagine? When Jesus saw him lying there, he knew that already he had been in that condition a long time. He said to him, do you want to be made well? The sick man answered, Sir, I have no man to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I am coming, another steps down before me. This guy is not just in a bad situation because he's had this infirmity for 38 years. He's so isolated, he's so alone, he's so incapable, but that even the thing that he thinks could help him being so close, he can't get to it. Because when he tries, other people cut in front of him, and so even that hope is snatched away from him. Does that guy need change? Does that guy need uplifting? Yeah. And did you catch the point there when Jesus saw him, this man in need? Kind of takes us back to the Good Samaritan example in Jesus' teaching, doesn't it? When they saw, what did they do? Well, the priest walked on, the Levite walked on, but the Samaritan, he engaged. He engaged. Jesus sees this guy, and he engages. Do you want to be made well? Do you want to be made well? It's not just a bandage up, but Jesus is saying, I can heal you. I can change your life. So he does. He does. The guy meant that much. Jesus is showing that people matter. And that's instructive, and it's aspirational, and it's an expectation for us. Because when we start noticing the way Jesus engages with people, that's helpful to us. We can say, yeah, I know the teaching, and I know there's an expectation to go and do likewise from the Good Samaritan. And yeah, I can see these different examples, so you're showing that there's consistency in what he did as he lived that. So he's not a hypocrite, heavens no, but he's living it in reality. But we got to go a step further, because one of the great things that we need to do as Christians is we know a teaching, we can see an example, but one of the questions we always ask ourselves is, well, how do I do that on a regular basis? How do I do that? And I would encourage you to read these 5 chapters completely, and also understand, as you go on to John 6, guess what? You're going to find another example. And if you go on through the other chapters of John, you will find more and more and more examples of where Jesus was changing people's lives. It's consistently his purpose all the way up to the cross, where he truly changed our lives by dying for our sins and giving us the opportunity to be healed in the most serious way possible, that we could have salvation and life in him. That's an incredible change. So when we look at these chapters a little deeper, we start to see the how. Man, I want to know the how. And then we start seeing that there's a multitude of ways that he engaged. Like in John 1, with Andrew and Peter, Jesus is engaging in a situation where Andrew is bringing someone to him. It's still worthwhile. You may find it that someone is brought to you in need. Respond to that in kind. Jesus just spoke to him and valued him and included him, Simon, in this situation. And look at the bond that grew over time between Simon and Jesus from this moment when Jesus engaged him and changed his life. It seems like such a little thing at this moment, but boy, that was a transformative moment that led to so much more. Someone brought him to him. And this one's also helpful because it means sometimes you may not feel like you are fully empowered to make a big difference in someone's life, but you might know someone who is. And you engage by connecting those people. That's a powerful way to be involved, and it matters, connecting people. I love that when we talk about evangelism in Bible studies and such, sometimes you got to think in terms of a team, in terms of a church. And when someone comes and requests a Bible study, sometimes it's, hey, I think I know the perfect person that might be there for you, and you want to connect people. You may not feel like you're fully capable of doing that. You're probably more equipped and capable than you think, but sometimes it's just connecting people. You may not be able to make all the biggest difference in the world to someone, or you perceive that, but you might connect them to someone who can. That's instructive. It's aspirational because look at the degree of change that took place. And it's an expectation that we should do likewise. John chapter 2, a circumstance. It was just a circumstance that he was at this wedding and the wine ran out. That was the circumstance. But in that circumstance, Jesus, having a purpose of changing people's lives, saw opportunity. If we are in circumstances and we understand our purpose, then that allows us to have greater clarity in seeing opportunity. Every single day, the truth is we have opportunity to be able to affect and change people's lives. Perhaps 1%, perhaps 20%, perhaps 40%, and perhaps sometimes you're the person that gets to be there, and it's much more significant. Much more significant. But the greater clarity you have in your purpose, you can see, no matter the circumstance, the opportunity to change someone's life, to make a difference, just like Jesus. Chapter 3, he responds to a person that initiates the contact. Nicodemus sought him out. Again, I said, probably an inconvenient time, late at night. Perhaps Jesus had other things going on, but he took value in Nicodemus. This is when Nicodemus had the need, so Jesus engaged him at that point. He valued him where he was, and then led him to where he needed to be, even though someone else initiated that at that time, showing the value that people matter. John chapter 4 and John chapter 5, Jesus initiated the action. And sometimes that's what we need to do as well. Initiate the action. I know this is sometimes challenging depending on your personality. You may find it very uncomfortable to initiate an action with a stranger. Okay, I get that. But I also get that you can work at that. You can. Because Jesus is making an instructional example. It is aspirational in that sense because you want to get to that point. We know there's so many people that have great need. It's a dark world. We live in a time when it's so much easier to get beat down than it is to get lifted up. It's so much easier to hear criticism than to hear encouragement. We can't be the people, the Christians, the people of Jesus who participate in that. We must be assertive in lifting and changing the world around us to help them see Jesus. We can't hold back. We can't hide in that regard. We are the people to reflect His light. It's on us. It's our purpose. And Jesus is inviting us to participate in that purpose. And then that means if God has given us an expectation, we don't have to fear. It's what's right. And it means it's what He's going to support. Even if it seems impossible or it seems difficult, He's going to be there. You can right now think of a number of Bible stories where He's given people things to do that seem difficult or impossible or challenging, but it was His expectation. And if they were faithful and if they did it and they moved through the difficulties, He helped them be successful. He was always there with them. Always. And sometimes that was because the church was there with them. And sometimes it was because someone came and encouraged them and changed their life and lifted them up. But He was always there, and He's here today to help us do the things that we need to do in His kingdom. Today's lesson is about remembering our purpose. Our purpose in the kingdom is to be like Jesus. And one of His purposes was to change lives for the better. Not because of my wisdom and not because of our intelligence, not because of our strength, but because of what He said in His Word. That's the focus. It's got to be. We get to carry it out. Whew, what a blessing to be able to do that. And what an amazing blessing it is when you see people respond. You may say, well, what do I do? How do I do this? Because the lesson was today, wasn't it? You can do it today. I want you to think about all the people you interact with. You could start with the prayer list. That's some people that might need some change. Oh, I get it. You can't walk over and go, be healed. If you try that, we should talk. It's probably not going to work, but you can pray for them. You can call them. You can encourage them. You can be there for them. You could take someone a meal. You could do that. There's a lot of ways to be engaged with people, but that's a place to start if you want some names to focus on and help and love and care about and to change their life. Maybe a small way, maybe a significant way. That's important. You may think about the people you don't know yet that you encounter out in the community. Sometimes after church, it's not uncommon that people will go out and eat. Sometimes you go to the same place weekly, and sometimes you know people and are recognizing the staff there. I think I've shared with you before, there's a Mexican place in town I love so much. And when I go there, most Mondays, too many Mondays, they know when I'm going to order. They know my voice when I call it in. And when I walk in, I love it because they lift me up. They're like, hey, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? That's fun. And sometimes I'll sit down, and I knew I'd crossed over into a good place when some of the staff came in. I was like, hey, I don't know what, but he gave me a fist bump on the shoulder. And I was like, oh man, I'm in. We've crossed that space. I'm in. I love having those places where you feel like community. It's really community. I love that. You have those same things in your own way. I don't know what restaurant it is. Some of them, it takes time. I remember I went to one in a particular side of town and not a regular, and all the regulars kind of gave me the, you're not us look. I was like, all right, not yet. Not yet. But it's good. Those are opportunities. You may be thinking someone in your family, someone very direct that needs a change, that you could benefit. You could do that as well. You are capable. You can do it. Today's lesson was to remind us that it needs to be a regular part of our lives, an everyday thing, just like Jesus. That'll change our community. That'll help people see God. That'll change your faith as well. Just be a blessing. Be good, be kind, and be very generous in what you give of God to the world. Today we'll close out there. We'll go through this a little deeper throughout the next couple of weeks. I hope you're looking forward to it, and frankly, I can't wait to hear you share humbly, of course, and not glorifying yourself, of course, but just share what you're doing. Somebody else might need to hear that and get that encouragement, and I appreciate that. It's instructive as well. And many of you are so good at it. I love when you tell, because it's aspirational, because I'm not to where some of you are in doing this, and so I appreciate that tremendously. But the expectation is for all of us to engage, and that we can engage with whatever level we're at. Today, you might not yet be a Christian. You could be. You should be. God's word is his entire invitation for the fact that you can be. Your sin is not so great that Jesus can't cleanse it away. Your doubts are not so strong, or your lack of learning of what you don't know about the Bible yet. It's all there, and he intended for you to have it. He wants his word to be understood. He wants you to be with him in his kingdom. As you read, hopefully this week, John 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you can see that over and over and over again. Jesus is here to change our lives because he wants us to have a better life, an abundant life. He wants us to be with him in heaven. You can do that. You can become a Christian. And not just a Christian, an excellent Christian, an amazing Christian. God tells us how. Today, if there's a way that we can spend time talking about that, if that's your desire, if there's a way that we can and show that more clearly through the word, man, we would love to do that. We would love to do it. If there's a need that you have, there's a way that we can support you, or even if you just need prayer today, and that's a way your life can change, just to know that you're loved and cared for, and we can do that with you today, please, please, please don't hesitate. Let that happen. Let it happen. Right now, as we stand and as we sing.